of an afternoon like this, especially when it's a beautiful day outside. It's quite wonderful that so many of you are readers who appreciate the writers who are with us today. So thank you for choosing to be here and for choosing to be readers and possibly writers. My name is Patsy Hicks, and I'm Director of Education here at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And this afternoon is a continuation of our series of parallel stories, which brings writers, artists, performers into the museum as a kind of a parallel to the exhibitions that are on view. And what often happens with Pico, an unintended serendipitous moment, the exhibition upstairs happens to be called, in perfect sync with his beautiful travel writing, "You Are Going on a Trip." And although this afternoon we're not focusing on geographic relocation, we will be exploring traveling in the mind and in the heart with these two writers. So we want to let you know that following this, there is a book signing upstairs where many books are available except for Janet Fitch's latest book, which doesn't come out until November. But we encourage you to come up for a small reception, wine and cheese, and to also look at this fantastic exhibition, which our contemporary curator, Julie Joyce, has put together with the help of Michael Duncan in Los Angeles. It's a beautiful show of prints from our permanent collection. So, now to the business at hand. An eloquent explorer of the inner and outer world, Pico Iyer was born in Oxford, England, to parents from India, and educated at Eton, Oxford, and Harvard. Since 1986, he has been writing books, and since 1992, he has been based in rural Japan, while spending part of each year in a Benedictine hermitage in California. He's the author of numerous books, including Video Night in Kathmandu, The Lady and the Monk, The Global Soul, The Man Within My Head, and The Art of Stillness, which I can recommend for any of you who have a fear of flying as the perfect antidote to that. I used it in a recent flight to Hong Kong, and I've never been more soothed. He's an essayist for Time since 1986. He also publishes regularly in Harper's, the New York Review of Books, and the New York Times. Pico has shared his warmth and wisdom with us on this stage many times, most recently in conversation with artist Louis DeSoto, in which they explored Buddhism, fathers and sons, and the art of stillness he practices to bring calm into the motion of the world. Today he has with him third-generation Los Angeles native, award-winning and best-selling author Janet Fitch, whose first novel, White Oleander, was hailed by Oprah, among many others, calling her fiction art, real, layered, and complex. No stranger to the inner world herself, Janet said in an interview, "In our exterior life, we can only be one person, but in our imagination, we can be anyone, anywhere. That's one of the reasons I read and write. It's a way for me to have more than one life." Her new novel, coming to bookstores this November, The Revolution of Marina M, was inspired by her earlier study of Russian history while an undergraduate at Reed College. Luckily for us, she chose to be a writer rather than pursue her initial idea of being an historian. Today, together, these two accomplished writers, thinkers, and friends discuss what inspires them, why art is more urgent than ever in our confused and polarized times, and which are the works that can bring light and delight while broadening our horizons. Please join me in welcoming these two most generous and genuine of writers, Pico Iyer and Janet Fitch.
Welcome. I'm so happy to see you. I don't think I've seen you for a year or so. But I'll confess, one of the reasons I was really keen for this event is that so many of the writers I know spend all their time complaining about publishers or worried that somebody else has got a bigger advance or griping about their editors. And you're one of the few ones I know who's always just alight with inspirations and enthusiasms. I think of you as someone who's always talking about your latest discovery. So my my first question inevitably is, what has really excited you recently, in any form?
Oh my God. Well, as a novelist, it's funny, I get more juice out of other art forms than necessarily fiction. I read and write a lot of poetry, especially writing a very long book, to see experience so compressed in a poem. It's just, it's a challenge. It unfolds in your mind like a water, little tiny piece of paper in a glass of water. It opens and opens and opens. So always, poetry. I just was a participant at Squaw Valley Community of Writers in their Poetry Week.
So you actually...
So I was, and it was wonderful to be a student after. I mean, I've been a teacher of fiction for a long time. So to have the experience of being a student again is just marvelous, because you're not embarrassed, because you don't have to be good, you're just a beginner. And it's important to have things that you're not good at. It's relaxing. So I draw, I paint, I do flower arranging, all kinds of things that I can be really, really bad at. Yeah, so that's kind of what...
And actually, if you're bad at something, there's only one way you can move, which is
That's
forward. Were you also teaching fiction? Or
yeah, I was teaching in the Fiction Week, and so it was interesting to go from being like rank amateur and then switching and being a teacher. It was kind of almost gives you the bends. Because when you're a student, you're responsible only to yourself and only to your own learning and your own pleasure. I kind of like it.
I think you also, I've always got the sense you really like teaching.
I do.
And you have an unusual way of teaching.
I'm a little bit too gregarious to be a writer. I mean, a writer as a person who likes to be in their room with the door closed, and I really do like people. So teaching gives me a chance to have those, those intense connections with other people. And also, writing is so, you depend upon the instinct so much. You try to get that judgmental self out of the way, that editorial self out of the way, so you can breathe and just be in the experience of creation. But if you've worked in a field for a long time, you do start developing an ability to analyze and use a more intellectual approach. And in teaching, you can use that. You bring your more analytic self into it.
Yeah, which is a blessing, because I must say, I've always found that I spent 8 years of my life as a kid only studying literature. And I found that's the worst possible thing for being a writer, because I'm always analyzing my sentences as soon as I'm making them.
Yeah, I had to learn to do that. I was I was training to be a historian, and so clarity is important. But aside from that, I just was getting rejected all over the place when I started writing. Just the rejections were ceaseless, and I had no idea why until I got a rejection from the Santa Monica Review. Just good enough story, but what's unique about your sentences? It's like, my sentences, am I supposed to put all the adjectives at the end, what do you mean? And it took me a while. It was like scrying chicken entrails or something. I'm trying to figure out what that meant. And I finally realized, the sentence itself has to be interesting. It has to be beautiful. It has to have a music to it. And then I realized it's like you're climbing and you think you're going to get to the top of the mountain, and you get to the top and it's just the knees of the mountain, and then you start to realize what the project really is.
So actually, just that one sentence suddenly cracked things open for you.
Yeah.
And I think you're often sort of inspiration for many writers, because, as I recall, did you promise to yourself on your 21st birthday, I'm going to be a writer? And in fact, your first book came out 20 years after that.
Right. I think, for myself, I don't know, how other people do it. I know it's people who decide at 9 that they're going to be a writer. I have to kind of put my flag in the sand you know, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to dedicate my life to this. And then you learn how to do it.
Yeah, yes.
Which is maybe backwards of most people, but I do most things backwards. So.
It's interesting, Elizabeth Gilbert was just here in Santa Barbara, and she was saying how when she was 16, she literally kneeled by the side of her bed, and as if praying to God, she prayed to the muse and said, I am going to devote my life to this. But what she's found recently, as you know, sort of like what you were saying, is that she's so good with people, and people so want to listen to her that she's more and more in demand for this kind of thing, and has less and less time for the muse she gave herself to.
Oh, wow.
It's a nice difficulty to have. Has everybody been asking you about this novel called The Girls, by any chance? Have you heard about it?
The Manson
Yes,
Girls?
yeah.
People haven't been asking me about, but I've read it.
What did you think?
I enjoyed it. I have, in my younger years, was sort of the phenomenon of the Manson family and cults in general. There's a cult in this book. The cults are fascinating, and the girls are fascinating. I've read, you know, Squeaky, her book, and I've read all those, you know. I've read all those books. I find the cults fascinating. Girls, the Source family in LA, they operated a health food restaurant, and they lived on the proceeds. That is an incredible book, written by one of the followers, who, it's wonderful because you can read between the lines. She's not a professional writer. She was part of the membership and not one of the favorites. But so the way she presents herself, you can read between the lines and see what was really going on there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like reading about North Korea or Cuba even. It's such a political thing if you're not one of the favorites and everyone's jockeying for it.
It is fascinating, and you know, he gave her a lot of responsibility because she was capable, but she just wasn't one of the ones that he wanted the most. And how she dealt with her position was really, really interesting. It was like reading a Soviet newspaper. I mean, it wasn't what you were reading, it was behind what you were reading. Yeah.
It's interesting, the reason I mentioned this book, The Girl, some of you may have read it, it's by Emma Klein. When I read it, I thought, this is the literary goddaughter of White Oleander. I thought that in some ways it had a lot of the graces of your first novel, and it even had the same perfume that Paul mentioned, and of course saturated with the feel of California, which is hard to get, and I sort of associate with you very strongly. But it's exciting and a bit daunting, because I think she was 25 when she read it, and when she wrote it, I thought, my goodness, she's sitting on a kind of literary grace and emotional wisdom I will never have. And most of my friends won't have. It's so exciting when you discover a new talent.
Well, it's where it comes from is really interesting. Because if you're writing on a certain level, it's like you have your own personal experience, but it's like the floor drops down, and you go from your personal experience into some kind of human experience that makes you start believing in the collective unconscious, that you can drop down into, a wider human experience than you could have known at age 25, certainly.
Yes. And then, in fact, one's writing is much wiser than oneself. Things come out of you never knew you were writing.
Absolutely.
So, and that's probably the aim, isn't it? I mean, you must have felt that my sense of writing is you do it and do it and do it in the hope that finally the floor's going to give way. Right. And you're going to be actually being written by something more than writing.
And as somebody once told me, there's no such thing as a permanent state of grace. You drop in, and then the next day it's not there.
So you have to stay with it as long as it, because it's,
you just ride it.
Because the muse is kind of the most unreliable of friends. You know she's going to show up at some point, but you don't know when. So you have to keep the door open, and you have to sit there for months or years on end.
And you keep working, because the muse favors somebody who's already working.
Yeah.
The muse never speaks to you if you're just taking a shower. I have to be really working hard on my own, and then inspiration will occasionally open up.
Do you, when you're in the middle of a big project, as you probably always are, do you actually seek out those other art forms you were mentioning? Do you go to museums or listen to music or?
Always,
Yeah.
always. you know, you're always looking for a new idea. You're always looking, you have to oxygenate the water. It's like as a writer, you use the oxygen in the tank, like you use it up daily. And you have to restore it. You have to keep that bubbler going or you suffocate. So you're always looking for a new idea. And often I get it from the other art forms. I'll see dance, I'll see, I'll be listening to music, go to a concert, looking at art. I'm very visual, so I get a lot of ideas from nonverbal forms. And then poetry too is, a poetic thought is very different from a narrative thought. Poetic thought it's like a moment, a condensed moment that then opens up. So it's different from a narrative thought, which is about time and moving through a story, through a series of moments. So poetry is very good to read.
And I think novels like yours are actually poems and works of prose simultaneously, right? Because the sentences are rich as poetry, but you have to keep the action moving.
That's the idea.
Because the other reason I'm so happy to be talking with you in the museum is, again, more than any writer I know of, I associate you with museums. I remember in White Oleander, there's this wonderful moment when the main character, Astrid, says, what some people feel in church, I feel when I go to the museum. I feel safe and elevated. And again, in moments of trouble, both your novels, the main character goes to the museum and something pulls out in there. So I'm guessing you know that experience.
Oh yeah, that's a constant. I was, right after the election, I was in Houston, and Painted Black came out of the Houston Film Festival, and I was in Houston for 3 days after the election, and I went to the Rothko Chapel, and it was such a release to have black Rothkos on 8 walls. It's an octagon, and to experience the reverb of all that dimensional. Well, what is black is all the colors, right? And so to go, it's like the paintings understood my emotion at the time. Very subtle, complex way, And they're black paintings, but if you look at them, they turn purple, they turn gray. There's an ashy, what is ash? It's the aftermath of, conflagration. So it hit a lot of the subtle emotions that are very hard to express in words. So yeah, it was like being in a church. It is like being in a church.
And it was giving you silence too, at a time of endless chatter. I mean, most of us are ODing commentaries and information and all of that. And you walk into the Rothko Chapel, and you're out at the moment, for one thing, in that sort of age to space. But you just sort of read my mind in 2 ways. The first was, when I read your first book, I think that's Matisse, even though the material is emotionally difficult, with a lot of light and colour. And when I read Painted Black, I think of Rothko, actually. So it's interesting that maybe you spent a lot of time
It's really
reading it
interesting
before.
to see what you think of Marina.
That's one of the questions I was going to ask you, and we're going to get to that. I was going to ask you what colour it was, the coming novel, because these are both the novels you've brought out so far, these big canvases with very distinct coloration and saturation of the senses. And, well, we will get to that, but while we're on it, what colour is this book?
Well, in Russian, the word red, krasny, and the word krasivy, beautiful, come from the same root. Originally, they were the same word. Krasivy is a new word. The original word is krasny. So red and beautiful are the same word in Russian. So the Russian soul, that's the same word. So that's the color.
And when you were studying history way back, as a young person, you were also learning Russian then?
Yeah, I took Russian in high school. In high school and in college. And never really, I can order a meal, I can talk to a cab driver, but I just loved Russian literature, and I had to do it.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto that, but actually you opened up this other avenue, because although I haven't seen you for a long time, last November, lots of strange things were happening in the world. and you started I was in Japan and you were in LA, and you emailed me, and we suddenly were conversing across the Pacific. What does a citizen do, and what does somebody involved in the arts do when you're bewildered by what's going on? And I don't think we came to an answer, but what was your thinking?
Well, I was just overwhelmed by the rhetoric, and I was, certainly a source of it too. I was overwhelmed by what should we do, how many, you just felt like you were in a boxing ring with 12 boxers around you. It's like you were getting slugged from every side, and I appeal to you as somebody who, you experience culture as it is, our lives, contemporary lives as they are, but there's a center there. And how does a person stay sane and centered in this, kind of a spiritual free-for-all that's going on, or free-fall or something, where it is coming in from every direction. And so we were having this conversation about carrying that ballast, kind of emotional ballast inside to keep right side up.
And carrying the balance too, actually, of not being too disengaged.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was writing to you, and because I spend a lot of my time listening to Leonard Cohen or doing events with the Dalai Lama, I was thinking, I'm too much a sort of quietist. So my response to everything is just go on top of a mountain and see things in a larger frame. But that doesn't always help when there's an immediate problem. So I think it's probably interesting for both of us who are coming from opposite directions, and you were giving me guidance about coming into the world. And I think I remember what I said to you was, unplug your media instantly. Did I say something like that?
Yeah.
The media's only going to make it worse. I say as somebody who, as Patsy was saying, I've been in the media 31 years, which is why I want nothing to do with it.
And that was really a good thing, because it's the reactiveness of the media that you want to hold the bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
So if you're knocked about too much by what happened today and what happened tomorrow, then you're going to miss like the big picture that's developing. I was looking at a Hieronymus Bosch painting called The Conjurer, and the Conjurer has a ball. He's doing one of those ball tricks, and a guy is leaning over the table, obviously a wealthy guy, is leaning over the table, staring at the Conjurer with those balls. Somebody's behind him picking his pocket. So it's the idea there's a difference between attention, where you're paying attention really hard to what's being waved in front of your face, and having awareness of what's going on all around you. And I think sometimes our attention is so easily distracted that we lose our awareness of what's really important. And so talking to you was really helpful.
Well, that's so good. I'm going to steal that, actually, because they talk about the attention economy. And I've been hearing people in Silicon Valley explain how Netflix, YouTube, and their competitors are all after that the main currency these days is the economy, is the attention. How do we grab you? And how does, for example, YouTube now, as soon as it endlessly goes on, so that you'll never move to Netflix or Google. Right. Well, not Google, but Facebook and their other competitors. It's a curious thing, but attention is...
You get your pockets picked.
But I love, and I love what you said about the larger picture, because it's corny to say, but I honestly believe that is what novels and every kind of art do. And that if you're in a turbulent political situation, turn to Julius Caesar, and you'll get much more than you'll get from the CNN. If you're dealing with elderly parents, as you and I have done, read King Lear rather than the latest how-to book.
Well, they say, in poetry, I got dealing with the Russian Revolution for 10 years now, that in very turbulent times, the poets are there first, because they're dealing with this compressed moment. Whereas it takes a little while for a novelist to get a sense of, because you need that big sense of that whole kind of psychic economy that is a time in history.
Yeah.
So it's slower. It's a slower process.
Yeah. No, and I was thinking of that today, actually, as I was driving down here, and I was talking to my wife about the second novel, Painted Black. It's set in 1980, isn't it? 80, 81. And it came out 2006, something like that. So I was thinking maybe that was at the punk era in Los Angeles. Maybe you could only understand that 20 years on, put it in perspective. Was that something behind your thinking?
It only develops into a metaphor for a state of mind later. It takes a while to filter all the way through the charcoal layers of your soul, till it becomes, it has some central meaning that it didn't necessarily have at the time.
And a resonance. It's like, actually, when you go into a museum such as this, and you're standing in front of the Rothko, that's how you're responding right now. And then you walk back and back and back in space in order to see the full thing, the big canvas. And in this case, in time, so that you can see how it fits into the larger story that's unfolding. But really, it's impossible to understand something that's happened for a long time. So this is probably the moment to turn to. I mean, I feel really mixed feelings, because this is the last event you'll probably ever do where you don't have to talk about this novel. But it's also the first chance you get to talk about it.
We'll talk about other things as well.
Yeah. Well, how would you, I know nothing about this, so I know you've been working on it for 10 years. How would you present it to us as something? It's coming out in November, is it?
Yeah. It's the Russian Revolution as lived by a girl who's a poet. History is something that is not just the story of the decisions that are made at the top. I'm interested in history as we live history. We're living history right now, but we don't know where it's going. We don't know the decisions at the top, maybe what we get off of Twitter, rumors, the rumors behind the rumors, and that's how they lived. So I'm interested in history as it's experienced by people caught in history. Sometimes it seems like history, like you're a flea on a horse, runaway horse, and you think, what am I going to do to control this? It's like, stay on. So that's the kind of history that I'm interested in. We think we are living in revolutionary times, but that was a revolution that completely turned society upside down. So if you were on the bottom, you're on the top. If you're on the top, you're on the bottom. Then who rises to the top? How do they rise? And what is it to live in a time where you don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks? How do you keep a floor under yourself? How do you keep your balance?
So it sounds like the very process of working on this and thinking through it would be helping you navigate the last 10 years.
And what happens, when you believe in something, and then you start to see how it is being manifested, when do you recognize that what's happening isn't what you signed up for? Some people don't do that at all. They just keep excusing it and saying, oh yes, this is what we signed up for. Yeah, because they just can't deal with the fact that what they're seeing does not jive with what they believe. So they change their story rather than admitting that this is not what it was supposed to be.
So actually we're back in the cult mentality too.
Oh yeah, the cult, yeah, that's the thing, is that, I don't know if people are going to see that, but it's, it is a microcosm.
And one way I would describe your work, the 2 novels you published, is it's kind of after the party. At the 6 a.m. when the bottles are strewn all over. And
That's my favorite time.
Because the first one the White Oleander, I see almost as the fallout from the 60s. And the second one, the punk era, as you said, 20 years on, how has that left its collateral damage around? And both of you and I were sort of came of age in the 70s, which is a strange time, because too young for the Summer of Love, too young for all the excitement we heard about from the 60s, and a big revolution then, but now we're dealing with the aftermath, as it were, which is the coda. So this sounds like it fits right into that pattern. My guess was, when I heard you were writing about this, that some of it will be about Anna Matovo, how do you say it?
Yeah.
Mandelstam and all the great poets who were challenged by the revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah?
It opens in 1916, and my character, as a romantic would-be poet actually visited the Stray Dog Cafe where the great poets would read their work to each other, just an underground, smoky underground cellar. So she actually goes and meets her hero, Akhmatova. And then in the next book, she is going to be, there was I guess you would call it a dormitory that Maxim Gorky founded for the poets and intellectuals of Petrograd to keep them alive. There was an abandoned building that they moved into all together. Imagine the great poets and writers of your city all living in one building together, teaching together, eating together, getting fights together. And I would love to see that happen in this country. Yeah, so Akhmatova and Mandelstam and Mayakovsky, these are all characters. And then there are characters who don't exist, but probably should have. That would be part of that million.
Is there a young woman at the center, as in the last two books?
Yeah, Marina Makarova. She's 16 when it starts. She's 21 when the revolution is over. And she's a poet, and she's a very passionate person, so there are wonderful men in it. And her close friends who each take their own place in revolutionary society. People go quite a long way from where they started in those 4 years. I mean, we can understand it. When in a revolution, a week could be like 6 months to us. Things happen so fast, and people move so far from where they started.
And there's this great phrase in Painted Black, I think it's called the true world. And there's a sense in the midst of kind of mixed up Los Angeles and the clogged freeways, intimations of something much greater, which mostly comes from art, often art from the past, and which kind of sparks our idealism. And it sounds like that will be
the true world. Yeah, it's a sense of in spirituality, you could talk about transcendence versus immanence, and I'm a great one for immanence. That the eternal is in this chair, and it's in you, it's in me, and it's right there. It's not, you don't transcend this world. It's here now. So that's the idea of the true world especially in Painted Black. In Russia, that idea of the sacred in the everyday and immanence it's not as strange to them as it is to us. They expect to find that in their art. They expect to find that in each other. I did a talk at a bookstore, a short reading, but a Russian read the Russian translation of White Oleander at a bookstore in St. Petersburg, a big bookstore, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week bookstore, opposite the train station if you ever go to Petersburg. And I was saying how the girl goes from home to home and everybody gives her an understanding of their sense of what is important in the world, what the meaning of life is, right, each home. And somebody in the Q&A raised their hand and asked me what was the meaning of life. Seriously, nobody thought it was strange. Everybody was interested. What did I do? Because they look to their artists and their writers to really weigh in on what is the meaning of life. I think we let our artists off too easy. We say, we ask about, where'd you get your agent? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what is the meaning of life? So that'll be everywhere in this book,
That's probably what, even when you were 16, first struck a chord in you, that the great novelist you introduced, her vision using prophets and laying out.
When I was 13, my dad gave me Crime and Punishment. And, I loved, of course, the high drama and, the angst and all that. I mean, every teenager knows that feeling. But, the sense of having this argument about God, the Grand Inquisitor section.
But that's Karamazov.
Well, that's Karamazov. I read that, I went on a streak, so it's all kind of compressed in my mind. But those are the big questions. That's why we, in earlier times, we didn't turn to self-help books to ask what the meaning of life was. We read the great writers to find out, who would ask these, not necessarily have answers, but just handling that material deepens your understanding of life.
Yeah. Well, speaking of handling the material, would you be willing just to read maybe for 1-2 minutes? This is probably the first time you've got to read from this book.
I would love to.
Just to give us a flavor.
This is the flavor of the book. Oh, and the light, the reading of light is really good. I read the bar once, and it was just like in a corner in the bar without illumination. It's like, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. Let me set this up. This is the opening of it. New Year's Eve, 1916, St. Basil's Eve is a night for fortune telling. And this girl is the daughter of a very fashionable family in St. Petersburg, Marina M, and they are telling their fortunes. It seems like a scene in a glass globe to me now. I want to turn it over and set the snow to swirling. I want to shout to my young self, stop! Don't be in such a hurry to peel back the petals of the future. It will be here soon enough, and it won't be quite the bloom you expect. Just stay there in that precious moment at the hinge of time. But I was in love with the future, in love with the idea of fate. There's nothing more romantic to the young until its dogs sink their teeth into your calf and pull you to the ground. What sign did I hope to receive that night? The laurel crown, the lyre, or perhaps some evidence of grand passion, some ardent Pushkin or soulful Dwork, or maybe a boy I already knew, Danya from dancing class, Stiva, with whom I'd skated in the park the day before and dazzled with my spins and reckless arabesques, or perhaps an officer like the ones who lingered before the gates of our school in the afternoons, courting the senior girls. I see her there staring impatiently into the candle flame, a girl both brash and shy, awkward, and feigning sophistication in hopes of being thought mysterious, so people would long to discover her secrets. I want her to stay in that moment before the world changed, before the wax was poured, and the future assembled like brilliant horses loaded into a starting gate. Wait. My younger self looks up. She senses me there in the room, a vague but troubling presence. I swear she catches a glimpse of me in the window's reflection, a woman from the future, neither young nor old, bathed in grief and compromise, wearing her own two eyes. A shudder passes through her like a draft.
So I have a very wise friend in New York, and a few years ago he shared with me his theory that you can understand every novel by going to the last word, just the last word. Because so much emotional weight, you know as a writer, that you're moving towards that and it all comes out. There's a real distillation going on. And so, of course, I went back and we read White Oleander, and the last word is California. It's a beautiful last line, something like, I would always know the time in California. And Patsy introduced you as a third generation Angelino, which is what it says on your bio. So when I first heard you were writing a book about the Russian Revolution, I was thinking, I wonder if this has anything to do with California. Growing up, just after the Californian Revolution.
It opens in California. It opens, the prologue is set in 1932 in Carmel. And so, so it does, yeah. There.
And the whole notion of revolution, I mean, the things you've been talking about, idealism and cults and revolution, we grew up with.
Right, yeah, and she, actually, in the prologue, there's a section where she's looking up the terms for flotsam and jetsam. And evidently, flotsam is remnants of a ship that is broken up at sea. And jetsam is cargo that was thrown overboard to lighten the ship. And so she's asking herself, am I flotsam or am I jetsam? And, you know, imagining a board from the ship that that is wrecked, washing ashore and, you know, maybe bearing the name of the ship, and the ship was
Revolution.
Revolution. Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely California is where she goes aground. But that's the only part of it that's in California so far, unless I write a third book.
And yes, I just lost my thought. I got so carried away with the notion of a third book in silence. But the other thing that is in all your books is sort of class struggle as it exists right around us in Southern California. And usually the heroine is a young woman looking wistfully but angrily at these gated mansions like in Painted Black. So was that part of what interested you also in the Russian Revolution?
Yeah, well, it's the opposite in this case. This is a girl of privilege who ends up having to make adjustments to survive in a new world. And I think if she had been an intellectual and a poet, established person, her voyage would not have been quite so successful. But because she was 16 in 1916, she's 17 when the revolution breaks out, she is not so embedded in the old world that she can't accept parts of the new world as part of herself, and it gives her a fighting chance.
She's on the threshold.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah. And because she's an idealist, you know, she comes from privilege, but she's not embedded in that privilege. She's idealistic and she's willing to give up a lot of that privilege so that there can be a more just world, a fairer world. But then she learns class is not as easily shed as all that. There are much deeper roots, and I'm very interested in that. You know, I think that to think that we're a classless society, I don't think people even think that way anymore. You know, I think the last year or two of our own politics has writ large we have class problems in this country that we've overlooked for a long, long time, with the myth that it was a middle-class society. Now we're starting to see what happens when you ignore ideas, when you ignore what you're seeing. Versus, you know, and staying with sort of the myth rather than seeing what you're seeing, really drawing the conclusion that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, because I think of White Oleander as a sort of map of forgotten parts of Los Angeles in many ways. Many of us in a room such as this never see those foster homes where Astrid is stranded. And then Painted Black ends in 29 Palms, which I was just visiting. And it's so close to Palm Springs that it's a different planet from Palm Springs. I mean, it's extraordinary. I've never seen a more broken place than that. Sort of a desert even before you get to Joshua Tree. I think I read once that you were working on a novel, or probably many novels, before White Oleander. Were any of those connected with Russian Revolution, or?
No, but there are always Russians in my work, except for Painted Black, which is just a 3-character play. There are always Russians there.
Yeah, no, I remember the foster home Russians.
Yeah.
Take Astrid. So did you go there while you were students?
I was a student there in '76 when it was still the Soviet times, and I went back in 2006. I mean, if they had not been speaking Russian, I wouldn't even know that it was Russia. You know, there was fashion and supermarkets and restaurants. Like, there was a BMW dealership right on the main drag in Moscow. And where before there were just banners saying, you know, congratulations to the party. Yeah, so it's a huge changes and continues to change.
You've been going back since 2006?
I had a fellowship, I had a Russian, there was a Russian foundation that brought American cultural workers over to do their research, and I went in 2009 and got a tremendous amount of research done. It was a good moment, God knows what it's like now.
It's interesting, as I listen to you, I have the same sensation as whenever I talk to you and read you, which is you're mentioning these real difficulties, class problems that exist in our country, political confusion, and the things that have gone wrong, but you seem like such an optimist. Would you describe yourself as an optimist?
I'm an optimistic pessimist, I guess. I certainly am always searching for something to be excited about.
Yeah.
I think my life, I can't deal with very much hopelessness. I just, I have to have something that I'm moving towards, something that excites me, something that vitalizes me. I don't think I could survive without that.
Yeah. I think the scary mother in White Oleander says something like despair is the enemy. And even though she's a formidable character, she represents a kind of hope and at least the world of poetry and the alternative universe it can
Or
create.
vitality.
Yeah. And indomitable. I mean, there's no putting her down. Did you tell me that you used to come all the way up to this museum to see exhibitions?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I've come up to see all kinds of exhibitions up here. It's always, there was a really good photography show this year a couple of years ago. I'd say it was like Habit show, Habit show, or I love photography, excellent photography.
And you paint yourself, you draw?
Well, I think quotation marks should surround that. But yeah, I'm taking Chinese brush painting right now.
Really?
Yeah. And I like it because it's restful and it's it has something nonverbal. It has something nonverbal, something that you just can. I'm not a good meditator. I get restless, but I can paint for long periods of time, listen to music and paint, and to me it's very centering.
That's a good response to confusion at the time. It's like bringing Rothko Chapel into your...
Yeah, and when I travel, I draw. For a while, I didn't take photographs because I felt like I was not looking at things deeply enough. It's a click, 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 and then it's like I'm going to look at it later. What? I decided that I would just take a journal and I would draw and paint what I was seeing. And it doesn't even matter if you're terrible. It makes you sit there and look. And you see things you would never have seen. You see relationships that you would never have seen. And there's something, especially when you bring out the paints, people come up to you. Even if you don't speak the language, when you're writing in a journal, people leave you alone. When you bring out the paints, everybody comes and they look over it, and then they go, oh, that's all. Or sometimes they have they have tips for you. It's just a wonderful, but it's a wonderful icebreaker, and it's a reason to look longer. So for me, art is a slowing down and really being present in a way that I guess other people can do meditating.
I would say, therefore, it's a training in attention, which is, just to go back, probably the greatest resource we have, because it's part of what intimacy is about. And if we're living in a world of distraction, then we can't give ourselves fully to anything.
Right, and we don't. It's like, when you're at your least mindful, and you sit down, you take out your phone, you take out your computer, you're typing emails, and you're looking at your phone, and it's like, you don't even know where you are. You're not experiencing it. You're not tasting the food. You're not looking at anybody. You're not engaging with anybody. I have to force myself to leave the phone in purse, leave the computer, just look around. Look at a little book of poetry, look around, say hi to somebody.
I was reading about an art history professor who asks the students to go and stand in front of one work in the museum for 3 hours. And she says, I know it's going to be really, really boring. It's fine, that's part of the whole project. Just stand there. Initially you'll be very excited, then you'll wonder what you're doing. But wait all that out and you come through at the other side. And you have a deeper conversation with that piece, and you will probably have the rest of the year with any living being. And I thought it was a very interesting way of reconfiguring. I mean that whatever a student's getting or not getting from the work of art, they'll get a lot from that exercise. So
things take time. Life takes time, perception takes time, and
understanding. So even though you're so open to every art, being an optimistic pessimist, I never felt, you're not one of those people who thinks writing is dead, nobody's going to read books, none of that. I've never heard you express a worry about being on the Titanic.
I feel that you just planted that suggestion. I'm in good company if this is the Titanic. I used to drive carpool when my daughter was in elementary school. So I had all these little kids in the car, and there was this one kid who was a pretty sensitive kid, said, everything is getting worse. The world is my mother said the world is a dangerous place. Blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what? The world is a very big place. And you can pay attention to what you want to pay attention to. And so that's how I feel. The world is a big place and getting bigger and more complex.
Yes, yeah.
It's getting more complex, so there's more good as well as more bad. It's just more. And you have to figure out where you want to stand. Where do you want to put your attention?
Yeah. Yeah, whenever people sometimes ask me, because I travel a lot, do you think the world is getting smaller? And I always think, only in Disneyland can you say it's as you were saying, the distances between one part of LA and another are huge, mutually incomprehensible universes. So the illusion that the world is homogeneous and we all understand each other every moment.
That's a fraud.
Yeah.
It's a fraud.
Yeah.
It's telling us not to look closer.
Yeah. That's right, because it's only the surfaces. You see McDonald's wherever you are, it means something radically different in St. Petersburg.
And when I teach, one of the things that I try to persuade people is that there are no, like somebody will write, and the stereotypical housewife. And it's like, there are no stereotypical people. There are only people who you are not observing closely enough. If you think that there is a general thing, a stereotypical thing. There is no such thing in the physical world.
Yeah. And there's no one without a story.
That's right.
And if one is despairing of books, one looks to this, which is going to be a book in more than one volume, an epic, Russian epic that's coming out. So clearly there's a market for that and an appetite for it. Maybe this is the time to open this up. Any questions you have for Janet or for me? We have some time, I think.
Do you have the mic?
Yes, please.
I think it would be remiss if we didn't ask you what was your response to that. I should have asked you the other day.
What was my response to the Russian question about what was the meaning of life? I think the meaning of life is to deepen humanity, to deepen our humanity, whatever that takes. That's right.
Was there a response when you said that?
We're not. There's one right in the middle.
Going along with Pico's earlier question, are you willing to tell us the last word of that book?
Well, I was really curious myself.
Asterisk is, this is only book one.
That's
This is midstream.
that's
And you've actually completed book two.
yeah. Well, I'll have some work to do on it, but it's in the back. Let's see what else we got. ask us anything. Pico's totally unflappable.
This question is for you, Pico. What is your take on the notion that meditation changes our brains? And the study that Tibetan monks have unusually different areas in the brain because of their long time meditating.
Well, I couldn't know less about that. I mean, you've asked the wrong person because I'm afraid I've never meditated. But I have followed some of those scientific researchers, and it's really fascinating. I know that the Dalai Lama is probably the biggest excitement of his life is the fact that for the first time in human history, we can empirically, objectively measure compassion, peace of mind, attention, and capacity for processing information. And as you said, starting in Wisconsin and now in Emory and Berkeley and Stanford and many other places, scientists are working full-time on the monks and on regular people, and more scientific articles are coming out in Nature and the most respectable, rigorous, peer-reviewed places make this unequivocally true. And so from the Dalai Lama's point of view, it's just like going to the health club, I think. So all of us know that if you put in your 40 minutes on the treadmill at Gold's Gym, you can appreciably, visibly see the changes in cholesterol levels, stress levels, other things, and exactly the same with the inner health club, that meditation is how you develop muscles that otherwise get atrophied or overlooked. So it's exciting that, as he always stresses, it has nothing to do with religion or being a better person or whatever, it's just a matter of health. And it's something that he probably, and anyone who's a physician or a mental physician, is excited about because it shows us ways that we can be happier than we were. For example, in Wisconsin, I believe 5-year-olds, there are 200 schools where 5-year-olds are taught to be quiet for 20 minutes every morning. And they found this made them more kinder to their classmates, better at paying attention to their teachers, and able to handle their things a lot better than they would otherwise. So I do think this is, you were so aware, everyone in this room, that technology has made every aspect of our lives, many aspects of our lives, brighter, happier, healthier than they were 50 years ago, and most of us will live much longer than our grandparents. And this is another aspect of this. And it's interesting, just this morning, a friend of mine who's a Tibetan monk sent me a draft of a book he's just completed. And in it, I read this pellucid example which speaks to this, which is somebody was saying that if you drop your key in a river, it's really, really hard to find. There's a lot of murk and lots of stuff on the surface. But you have to wait for the river as clear as possible. And as soon as the river's clear, you can see where the key is and you can pick it out. And this person was saying, well, that's what meditation is. The equivalent. As soon as your mind is clear, you can recall what's important. You can remember what you're looking for. But as long as it's turbulent, and this goes really to what Janet was saying about if Facebook is clicking here and CNN's over there and you're handling a text, you're probably not going to remember what you care about. You're only going to be in a reactive mode. And as you were saying, the meaning of life in that situation becomes dealing with the second rather than seeing the larger picture. So, although I don't know about meditation, I've been excited to read about the surveys.
Well, one of the things that I'm aware of is the art of the notion of mindfulness, where one focuses on something and then sort of lets it go and has a certain compassion about negative thinking. You kind of step back and say, you know, I'm not going to use that negative thinking against myself. And mindfulness is a kind of focus. And the more we focus on particular things, positive or negative, our neurons kind of fire around that. And then we change based on how our brain changes, which I find fascinating.
Yes, no, it's all about attention. I think one of the great things that Dalai Lama often points out is he says that for the last 400 or 500 years, Western science has worked so well on investigating matter, to such an extent that he has all his Tibetan monks study Western science, because we know much more than they do. But he says in those same years, they were off very secluded from the world, investigating the science of mind. And so they have developed as much about the technology of the mind as we have technology of matter. And the beauty of the global era is that Stanford can teach Lhasa now about how to use an iPhone. And Lhasa can teach Stanford about just how to focus. And in fact, how to put away the iPhone, maybe.
Janet, can you share the name?
Actually, I have a meaning to do this, but I haven't been able to. That way the room that's overflow can hear the questions. I just haven't been moving fast enough. I shouldn't have wanted to hear this.
Janet, can you share the names of some of the poetry books that have nourished you while you've been writing?
Oh my God. Well, it's more poets than the Russian poets. I'm a big Joseph Brodsky fan. So Joseph Brodsky, Marina Tsvetaeva. These are the Silver Age poets: Tsvetaeva, Mayakovsky, Anna Akhmatova, Osip Mandelstam. But contemporary American poets, for me it's always Anne Sexton. I love Dylan Thomas. Sharon Olds is a huge favorite. I got to study with her a couple weeks ago. I like Eliot, for the cadences of it. But Brodsky is a huge influence, and you'll probably see a little Brodsky in Marina's poetry.
Did you read the Russian poets in translation?
I read the Russian poets in bilingual editions because I like to see the original, although I couldn't translate my way out of paper bag and try to do it just because handling the materials is interesting. And then you see the English and you realize you got it completely wrong. But it gets you in there and you hear the sounds of it that you would miss otherwise. And I like to read poetry out loud because half of writing is just sound of it to me, the music of the line. So I love to read poetry out loud.
Can I ask, before we get to the other questions, do you read your own narratives out loud?
Absolutely.
Or,
Absolutely.
You read the whole of this book out
Yeah.
loud?
Many times. Here's one nice.
So when you speak of Marina, it sounds like you obviously know her very well, and I'm curious about the character development. Did you get to know her as you were writing the story? Did she, her character evolve, or did you first formulate in your mind who this person was by possibly referencing somebody who you know?
Interesting. I started in California in 1922, and I started writing. I wrote a story that was published in Black Clock called Room 721. It was this Russian emigre working as a hotel maid at the Hotel Alexandria, downtown LA. And I saw her very clearly, but after a while I realized I didn't know her well enough to write her story in 1922. I needed to live through the revolution with her to know who she was. So I had a sense of who she became, but not a sense of how she got there, who she was. And she was informed by bits of people I knew, bits of Marina Tsvetaeva, the poet, and bits of other people I knew, and bits of myself.
Yes?
My sister just got back from Russia, and she was there a month, and I asked her for a snow globe. And she couldn't find one. She was in St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Chelyabinsk.
Oh.
So where did you get the image of the snow globe, and do they make them there?
I remember a snow globe in my childhood that winds up and played the dance of the dance of the four little swans from Swan Lake. Yeah. So it just, for me, that's, for some reason, it's a really nostalgic piece of music. So that went with the snow globe in that little contained world. Also, I've broken one before.
Pico, you often say that you don't meditate, so what's the art of stillness?
Well, it's exactly what a mischievous editor from the New York Times says to a travel writer. So this editor from the New York Times said, all you ever do is live in airports, race from one country to the next. Have you never thought of just sitting still? And she sent me that assignment. So although I still haven't sat still, I thought it was an interesting thing to explore. And the one obvious footnote to that is one of the great incidental benefits of being a writer is that you get to spend all day, often sitting in one place, cutting through your projections and distortions and trying to find the true voice behind the many voices in which you can speak. So I've never meditated, and I'm embarrassed about that, and as Janet was saying, I'm sort of too restless for it. But if you were to ask my wife, who's in the front row, about this, she'd roll her eyes and say, all this guy ever does is meditate. He wakes up, has breakfast, goes, sits in his desk for 10 hours, then goes to sleep. So, you know, a writer at some level, his job or her job is to meditate full time. So maybe that gave me a sense of some of the universes that lie within stillness, because that's where White Oleander comes from, that's where this book comes from, and that's where, you know, we're explorers of the inner universe, essentially, as writers.
Well, in a way, we have to get out of our own way. You know, we are the least interesting part of our writing. And all of our angst and whatever our problem is, sitting down and hungry and looking in the fridge and all that is just the least interesting part of what we do. And I think a lot of meditation is just getting yourself out of the way, somehow figuring out how to get all that noise out of the way, whether it's sitting cross-legged or staring at a stream or taking a walk, whatever it is. It's that the essential thing. I tell my students sometimes, get the I out. You know, just get out of there and let what's underneath come up.
And as you were saying, just getting out a sketchbook and getting absorbed in that, as opposed to standing before a painting in the Welfare Chapel. In other words, it's, any form of attention is a layman's first step towards meditation. Two hands down here, I think.
How about if we do this and then make the next one the last one? Is that what you're talking about?
Forgive me, I can't remember who said this, but there's that saying, kill your darlings. How do you decide what darlings to kill in the process of your writing? Because you must have many.
Oh my goodness. That's my weak point. I'm there are the minimalists and the maximalists. They're the thrower-inners and the taker-outers, and I'm the thrower-inner. So I cut things that gets twice as long. That's a tough one for me. And I will, left to my own devices, I will also kill the wrong darlings, so that I take out everything that's interesting and leave what is inert and boring. So what about you?
No, you speak for every writer. I was going to say it's impossible. I was thinking about it this morning. I'd written a really nice piece, a passage in a book, and I realized the book would be better without it, but I just couldn't face taking it out. Every now and then, I think I was saying to Andrew here, sometimes I'll tell myself, well, it's like if you're organizing a dinner party and somebody comes along in an orange bikini. And that person in an orange bikini is so striking that actually it throws off the whole dinner party and destroys the thing. So really, you want that person away. But how can you resist somebody in an orange bikini?
Pico, I know you have traveled the world and have written fantastic articles about many places. Are there any places left for you to travel to besides the stillness of your mind?
Really, so many. I think Janet was talking a little bit about how big the world is. And in my experience, the world is inexhaustible. I have a list this long of places I've never seen, even in the United States. In my parents' homeland of India, I've never been to Goa, which everyone knows. I've never been to Kerala. I've never been to I've never been to Eastern Europe. I've barely been to Russia. I probably will never get to any of those places, and I won't feel sad about that. But I never feel that any of us runs out of opportunities. And in fact, just last year, my wife and I were thinking, well, what are the two things we most dislike? snow and cold. So this January, we were in central Alaska. The high temperature was -40 degrees. We were dog mushing, and by looking at me, you can tell what a champion dog musher I would be. So you go away from the places that you're drawn to, and instantly you're in a new self. You've got the eye out of the way, or the familiar eye out of the way, and in Santa Barbara, there's so many places I haven't seen. So many places. For a long time, the one place I dreamed of that I'd never seen was Iran. I finally made it there 3 years ago, and it was actually the single richest, most glamorous, and most unexpected place I'd ever seen. It exceeded every expectation, though I had 40 years of expectation. So it confirmed my sense of what a joy it is to travel. And now, of course, it'd be interesting to go to Afghanistan, too, to compare it with Iran. But, as I say, Santa Barbara is quite a lot. And maybe I'll end with just one question for all the Janet Fitch fans in the room, which is, in each of your books, there's songs of innocence and experience. There's a young woman, and there's quite a forbidding mother figure. And you've tantalized us in so many ways regarding this. Is there an older mother figure in this?
There is a mother and a father this time, a very strong father.
Okay.
But the mother is a mystic. So she's not forceful, but she's very much a presence and a very, very much at odds with the times.
You believe in magic, I think.
I believe there are stranger things in the world than a strict rationalist would admit to.
Everyone in the audience, I want to thank both of you for creating magic of your own on this stage, and to once again invite all of you who have come to join us in the galleries upstairs, where there will be book signings, or in the case of the Revolution of Marina M, we have a card signing in lieu of the book, which won't be in your hands until November. But this has been just a wonderful conversational trip with you, and we thank you for sharing it with us so openly and so genuinely, as you always do in each experience we've had. Thank you each and every one of you for being here. I'm going to whisk these two away to get upstairs before you so they can sign books. Books are also on sale up there, and there's some wonderful art to look at, which might inspire you to write the next novel. So thank you again.
This was fascinating. I've started White Oleander twice, but never got it. I can't remember what it was. I started Art of Stillness. I did too. I never. Why? So the film is there. Oh, I'm not. Look at the size of it.
wrote the story. I've only done documentaries, and I get this it's like saying I'm not an author, but I have to write a book for another language. I really care deeply about these issues, and I'm feeling like media is the way that we can change consciousness to care, you know.
It's got some really nice
and now I was introduced to a contract, a resident.